On this episode of Maritime Insights from a Deck Officer, we're going to look at this massive cruise ship, the MSC World Europa, the sixth largest cruise ship in the world that lost power in the Mediterranean Sea. And we're going to have a look at what happened to these 8,585 people that were on board. Now, I've read quite a few news articles over the past couple of days around this, and they all dramatize it quite a lot. But having a power failure on board of a ship, of course, it is not ideal, but the safety of the passengers were never a concern. I've been on cruise ships as a deck officer, and I've experienced about maybe 1 or 2 power outages on cruise ships before. And of course, it is not ideal, but it happens, and there's a way to fix that. So we're going to have a look at what happened exactly. So let's have a look at the cruise ship in question, the MSC World Europa. And oh my God, cruise ships are getting so ginormous. I just can't believe it. Every time I'm stunned by the size of these vessels and how many passengers they can take. They do Mediterranean cruises. At this point, they were doing a 7-night Mediterranean cruise. You can see some of the interior pictures over here. Absolutely stunning, very modern. The nice spa. They have a yacht club, which is a luxury private club, which is very cool. And then here are some views about the suites and the balconies. Of course, there's a lot of entertainment on board. Of course, there's a lot of restaurants and buffets on board. Lots of bars and lounges. And here's a deck plan, which we will get to later to show you something on that. And here are some numbers. So the gross tonnage of the ship is 215,863 tons. They have 2,626 cabins. The overall length is 333.3 meters, which is about 1,000 feet. Number of passengers, 6,762. Crew members, 2,138. And combined, that is 8,900. So that is a lot of people that they can fit on that ship. And then the maximum speed is 22.7 knots. That's also important for later on. Now let's have a look at the MSC World Europa cruise itineraries. It is currently doing a 7-night Mediterranean cruise, and it goes from Barcelona to Marseille, to Genoa, to Naples, to Messina, to Valletta, and then back to Barcelona. So it's a 7-day round trip. And as you can see here, so the power outage happened on Monday, and they were on their way from Genoa to Naples, and they would arrive in Naples at 1300, which is important, and then departure at 8 o'clock in the evening. So I had a look at the track of the MSC World Europa. As you can see, we're in the Mediterranean, and they were going from Barcelona to Marseille, to Genoa, then to Naples, then to Messina, then to Valletta, and now they're on their way back to Barcelona with an ETA of August 29 at 5:30 local time, and now they're doing 20 knots. So they're well on their way and everything is okay. But when we go back to the track from Monday, we can see here there's a little squiggle on the line, and it's all red. That means they had very low speed here, between 0 and 2 knots is red. So that is where the incident happened, where they lost power. So where were they? They were about 100 miles south here of Rome, and they were close to the island of the Isola di Ponza, which they were about, I would say about 9 miles southwest of that island. Now, as you can see, the ship veered off to starboard to, avoid or to get bigger distance between the island and them. But 9 miles is quite a way if you are dead in the water. So there was no real risk there. And you can see they kept going and going and going. Also, there wasn't a lot of wind. The wind was about 7.8 knots, and I've seen some video and some photos later on. The sea state was calm, so hopefully the wind also helped them push a little bit more in this direction, so there was no real danger for them. Now, people would say, why would they not drop anchor to make sure the ship doesn't drift in any direction? Well, it is way too deep in this area over here to drop your anchor. If you would drop your anchor, you would probably just lose it. You would drop it and it's gone. So that would not be a good idea. The closest tugboats would maybe be on the island, but you know, they were still way off the coast. So they would first make an assessment on the ship itself by the officers and the engineers to see what is really going on the ship. Now I've noticed some things over here with the times of the ship. So at this point here, it is 3:20 UTC, which would mean it's an hour later. So it's 4:20 local time on the ship. Now at 4 o'clock, the most senior officers will come on watch from 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Because they will do the approach together with the captain and the chief officer. They will do the approach, the arrival to the port of Naples. So at 4 o'clock, when they change course, when the new watch comes on the bridge, they will have a look at all the information that is available to them. And we know that the ship arrived or should arrive at 1300 in Naples. So that means they probably would get the pilot at noon, and that means they would look, what is the speed that we need to do from now on to noon to get there at the right time to pick up the pilot at noon. So they would look at that once they got on the bridge. And from there on, they have to make a decision, okay, at this speed, we arrive at 11 a.m., which is way too early. So let's reduce speed. And once we reduce speed, we will then be there on time at 12 o'clock. So what happens is the officer of the watch on the bridge would call to the engine room and say, hey, we would like to reduce speed because or else we will be too early in the port. And the engine room says, okay, that's fine. So then on the bridge, they reduce power. And then once they have reduced power, in the engine room, they will see if the load of the ship for the power that they need can be reduced to, let's say, 3 engines. So on the ship, they have 5 LNG gas generators to produce electricity. So on this voyage, they were doing 21 knots, which is quite fast. So I suspect they would have 4 gas generators already on. I doubt they would have all 5 because you always want one as a backup. If something happens with one of the other 4, it can take the load on the 5th one, and then you can shut down one that has issues. So they probably had 4 engines running, and they probably reduced their power to just 3 engines at that time. Now, at that time, there's a lot of things happening. So the load goes from that 4th engine, but the other 3 engines need to take over the load from that 4th engine. But because they reduce speed, they can see in the engine room, okay, the power that is now being requested, we can do this on 3 engines. But if it's marginal, let's say, yes, you could do it on 3, but yeah, you can barely do it on 3 engines. And then suddenly there's more power asked, maybe from the hotel system, like maybe in the bakery, they start up a whole bunch of ovens. That would maybe trigger an overload on the ship, on the engines, that they could no longer take that load. Now, normally a 4th engine would automatically kick in. It would kick back in, but maybe something happened that it didn't. So then if those 3 engines can no longer sustain that load, then they will say, okay, I'm going into overload, and 1 engine trips. That means that the other 2 engines then need to take all the load that is being requested from the system, but they don't have that either. So they say, I'm going to trip and I'm going to trip. And then you have a complete power failure. So once you have a power failure, all the lights go off. You have no more propulsion. There will be some emergency lighting coming on. You will have some essentials that will still keep running, especially on the bridge and in the engine room. On the bridge, there is a lot of equipment that is powered by emergency batteries, like the radar and GPS and the radios and stuff like that. Really the basics. And in the engine room, of course, they will have that as well, so that they can also power things back up. So the other thing that could have happened is when they reduced from 4 engines to 3 engines, that the load from the forward engine that was transferred to all the other 3 didn't go smoothly. So there could be some frequency or voltage dips that caused it to trip one of the remaining 3 engines to say, okay, whoa, what's going on? And so if that one trips, then the other 2 need to take over the load as well. But they can't because it needs at least 3, so then they trip as well, and then you also have a complete power outage. As you can see, they had the power outage then, and they started to slow down. Here it's 4, so at 3:25 they were still going, so 4:25 local time, and then at 5:40 they already start slowing down. So yeah, probably somewhere around here. So close to like, yeah, probably like 5:15 or so local time. That's when they lost power, and then they just glided down the path, and then they were at a speed of 6 knots, and here even less, and so and then here even stopped. But here you can see they were going again, so they were back underway. At about 15 knots of speed, so they were picking up speed at 13:56, so let's say 14:56, so 1500, so at 3 o'clock they continued their way. Now remember, they were supposed to arrive there at 1300 at 1 o'clock, and so they're already 2 hours behind schedule, and then they still had to go to the port. I have experienced a blackout on a cruise ship myself in Hawaii, close to Lahaina. It was in the middle of the night. I was still sleeping, but suddenly in the middle of the night we had a complete power outage, a complete blackout. And you notice that because the air conditioning stops running, and the ventilation, and yeah, it just suddenly gets quiet on a ship real fast because the engine stopped running, so there's also less vibration in the ship, and you're like, hey, what's going on? So I was already on my way to the bridge, but then I got a call, say, hey Mark, come to the bridge. So I went there, and all the officers got woken up to come to the bridge because we had to figure out what's going on, what is the next plan, are we in danger, what's happening, but also there was like a ton of alarms going off on the bridge. I remember I come on the bridge and I just hear beep, 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 like everything was beeping, because if the important navigation equipment starts losing power, it needs to notify us, hey, I'm no longer working, I'm not getting any power. So all this equipment is all connected to the radar. So the radar also beeps and gives all these errors about, you know, I'm not getting any wind speed, or I'm not getting any speed, or I'm not getting any GPS. So the radar is beeping, and all the other equipment is beeping. I was like, wow, this is crazy. But obviously we had to check, where are we? Are we close to land? And we were about 1.5 miles away, something like that, from land, which was quite close, and it was windy. And we had to assess what to do. But we couldn't really drop anchor there either, because obviously Hawaii, they're all volcanic islands, and the water depth goes down real quick and real deep. So even there, you have to get really close to the land to even be able to drop anchor. But 1.5 miles off, you know, that basically mountain underwater, the volcano, yeah, you can't drop anchor there. But we restored power again, I would say probably an hour after the initial power outage, and then we continued our way to the next port. So that wasn't that big of a deal. Now, how do you restore power to a ship like the MSC World Europa? Well, on every ship there is an emergency diesel generator, which normally sits somewhere on a top deck on a cruise ship. And I believe it's probably right over here on this top deck over here. And you can see it over here. It's the 21st deck, the Valletta, and these are some cabins in the front, but this is the aft area, and it's probably in here or in there, or maybe it's one deck lower in that area over here. And there's a reason why it is up high, why it is up here. Because can you imagine, the main engine room is here in the bottom. That's where all those 5 engines are located. And if there is an engine room fire, you do not want your emergency diesel generator to also be in that area. So that's why it's separated. So the emergency diesel generator has its own fuel supply. It is its own standalone system. So it cannot be affected by the engine room itself. Or when you have a collision and water is coming inside the main engine room, the emergency diesel generator is still high enough that it is also not affected. So those are the 2 reasons why it is probably up here, far enough from everything else and in a safe location that it can always be operated. Now, normally when you have a power outage, the emergency diesel generator will automatically start so that you can have power again to start one engine and so on, and the second one, the third one. But in case that does not happen, there's a complete power outage and it's not happening, you can go up there and start this diesel generator yourself. Then you will have electricity again, and with that electricity you can start the first main engine. Now I can hear you thinking like, okay Mark, but you said this ship has 2 propellers. Why does it have 5 generators? Well, the 5 generators produce the electricity for 2 electromotors that then propel the propellers. So those 2 electromotors are each 25 megawatts, and the power is being supplied to those electromotors by the generators. So the generators run on LNG, but they produce the power, the electricity for the motors. I hope that makes sense. So what kind of generators are we talking about here? And here you can see in the MSC World Europa they have 5 Wärtsilä 14V 46DF 4-stroke dual fuel engines, which means they are a 14-cylinder, and the bore of the cylinder, the width of the cylinder is 46 centimeters, and it is a 4-stroke dual fuel engine, which means it can run on LNG, but it can also run on low sulfur MGO, which is marine grade oil. And to give you some idea of the power output, is 16,030 kilowatts, which is about 22,000 horsepower, and it weighs 223 tons. So that's just one engine, so that's quite impressive. Here you can see the size of the 46DF. It's the 14V, so the 14 cylinder. It is about 12.3 meters in length, and then you have to add B and F together, so the 3870 plus 1620, it's about 5.5 meters tall. So these are quite big engines, but they have 5 of them in a row to produce in total about 110,000 horsepower. So when I was working on a container ship, we had the largest diesel engine in the world on that container ship, which was a 12-cylinder Sulzer engine and had a 96 centimeter. The bore of the cylinder was 96 centimeter, and we have 12 of those. And as you can see, it's very tall. It's about 5 or 6 stories high. You can see all the people walking here to give you an idea of how big of an engine this really is. Now, on a cruise ship, an engine like this does not make a lot of sense, because you would have to put that somewhere on the ship, and then you would have to build a structure around it, meaning the cabins would be the engine would be surrounded by cabins where people sleep in, or it would be surrounded by other passenger area or by other crew area that will be around this engine, because it is so tall. And obviously that will cause a lot of vibration. It will be there will be a lot of heat. It will be very noisy. So that's why instead of using one giant engine, they use 5 smaller engines which produce the same power as this engine would, because this engine would produce about 110,000 horsepower, and the 5 smaller generators would also produce the same amount of power. But you can now have these 5 engines next to each other in line on a low level and keeping the height down. So that way you can use all that area above, like for passenger and crew area and entertainment area and, you know, like hotel area. So you can structure it how you want it. Now on a cruise ship, the main engine room is always from the forward ship all the way to the aft ship, and normally on container ships and other larger ships, the engine room is either in the front of the ship, or mostly in the back of the ship, or on the front of the ship, depending on if it's a ferry or something. But it just doesn't make any sense to have this big of an engine on a ship. There are also other reasons why it's not this and why they have 5 generators, because if you don't need the power of this giant engine at all time, then you can just say, okay, from these 5 engines that we have, we're only going to use 1 or 2 when you're in port. You just gonna, you know, and that will save fuel. So there's a lot of reasons why it makes more sense to have 5 engines. Also, the center of gravity is lower if you put all those 5 heavy engines all the way in the bottom of the ship, and that will help also with stability. So those are some of the reasons why they have 5 generators and not 1 giant engine. So here you can see the track of the MSC World Europa coming into Naples. As you can see, they were coming in. And over here they turned around, and then they backed it into this position. Well, obviously there's now a different MSC ship, the MSC Divina, but because it's already Thursday by now. But this is where the MSC World Europa was docked on Monday. They also came in with 2 extra tugboats to assist, you know, in case something went wrong, because they just had a power failure, and it's always safer to come in with 2 tugs. As you can see, they were docked at 1826 UTC, which is 1926 local time. So let's say 1930. So they were supposed to dock at 1300. So that was 6.5 hours later is when they actually docked, and they should actually leave at 2000 as well. But they left quite a lot later. If you continue the track, they were then leaving again, and you can see here the next point is 4 local time in the morning. They had a speed of 7.7 knots, so yeah, they probably left around 3:30 or so in the morning. They left here from Naples on and continued their itinerary to the next port. Now, I've read that there was some passengers that have left the ship and some passengers came on the ship, that it was all scheduled to happen. But it's kind of interesting because normally passengers will come on board pretty much all at the same time. In this case, Barcelona is the turnaround port, so they all come on board in Barcelona, they do the 7-day cruise, and then they come back and they all leave, and then new people come on board. Can you imagine that if you are delayed by this much, and you would come to a turnaround port and you have, let's say, 6,500 passengers that need to leave the ship, but you're coming in late. So this happened to me one time. We were on a cruise ship to Tampa. We just finished a Caribbean cruise, and it was super foggy, and we couldn't get into the port because they had closed the port because of the dense fog. So we were waiting, and then suddenly we got the clear to come in. It was still foggy, but we went in inside the port. Now there was about 4 or 5 other cruise ships as well, but that was our turnaround port. So all our passengers on that day, and that was on a smaller ship, but we had about, let's say, 2,500 passengers that would leave that day. But there was also 4 other ships, cruise ships, that were having passengers, and they were also leaving that day. So I would say probably about, let's make it simple, let's say 10,000 people on that day had to leave to go home. And we arrived that afternoon, probably about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the people that were leaving the ship, they were planning on taking a flight back home that day, but we were so late they missed their flight. So people had to, all those passengers, our passengers from our ship, but also from all the other ships, they had to be put into hotels. So it's 10,000 people unexpectedly having to go into hotels in Tampa, and also they had to reschedule and rebook their flights home for 10,000 people. So can you just imagine the logistics if you miss the turnaround port is absolutely huge. I remember I had to go off the ship that day as well. I flew back to the Netherlands, but I was still in the crowd with all the passengers, and I remember, yeah, they were not happy. I was in the hotel with them, and they were still quite upset. But that was a crazy experience. So I'm happy for the MSC World Europa crew that did not happen on the turnaround port day, because that would have been a real disaster. But now they could make up time again, because they had to then go to Messina, which is it is quite not a big stretch, but it's enough to make the time up to arrive in Messina on time and continue the rest of the cruise on schedule. So I'm sure they arrived in Messina right on schedule and continued their cruise as normal. Now, if you guys found these Maritime Insights by a deck officer interesting, then you can subscribe to my channel. But I would say even better, subscribe to my newsletter, my free newsletter on markhennis.com, because YouTube does not always show all my videos. If you would like to follow me on social media, you can do that as well. You can find me on, just do a search for Mark Hennis on Instagram, on Twitter, or on Facebook. And if you enjoyed this video, also have a look at this video right over here.